have a lot of experience with that. I've done some pretty extreme experiments with reinventing myself, like this one right here. Check this out. Huh? Well, that doesn't really look like a happy ending, does it? No. No. Especially when you see the before picture. Look at this. Yeah, that was a tough one. That was a tough one. And I knew I was going to need something big to build fire back in me, something to give me purpose. So I decided I was going to walk across the Rocky Mountains alone, retrace the route of Lewis and Clark. It was about 150 miles of ridge running and route finding through the skinniest part. It wasn't like a major trek. It was only going to take 6 or 8 weeks if everything went right. Go alone in October and November, so I would get back in before things got crazy out there. But long enough for me to be alone, that's why I called it Lost on Purpose. That just seemed appropriate. And that first month I spent angling up through the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, getting used to the pack weight and the miles, getting used to being that much alone. It was fall, and the weather was pretty good, and the colors were incredible. The whole thing was completely new to me. I'd never been in a wilderness area that big or that deep. You see things there that you just don't see outside. And I spent probably 30 days in there without any human contact at all. And then I got to Loxa Lodge, where I had agreed to meet my cousin after 1 month. I could only carry about a month's worth of food on my back. So we met at this predetermined point so she could help me reprovision. And we did. Stayed there one night. She stayed in a cabin. Of course, I had to sleep outside because Lewis and Clark didn't rent no cabin. That'd be cheating, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. And the next day, I went up Wendover Ridge. Now, if you know anything about Lewis and Clark's trip through the Rockies, that was the hardest part. It was just too steep and too rugged. They rolled animals. They lost Captain Clark's desk there. It was a hard time. And they were just really getting started through the mountains. And I had a hard time too. It started snowing. And I had snowshoes. But I had these little snowshoes, these sport snowshoes that you could carry on your backpack. I'd done the math. I'd calculated my weight and the pack weight and the surface area of the largest ones I could buy to get a flotation factor. And yes, I fudged the numbers a little bit, and I was paying for it. It snowed maybe 6 inches or more the first day, and the second day was about like that, and the snow was knee-deep. And I wasn't sinking all the way, but I'd sink up to my calf, which is hard because every time you take a step, you got to pull your snowshoe out of that hole and then move forward without falling over, which isn't easy with the pack in the snowstorm. And it was storming. I mean, you could hear 2 different winds, If you've ever been in a place that quiet, in that situation, you know that you hear the big wind, like in the background, like an ambient sound, rumbling back there, real soft undulations, modulations. And then now and then you hear this roller coaster coming at you, a little higher pitched as it's rolling through the contours in the mountain and making its way to you. And then it hit you. And it was a physical event. And I knew I was going to make it, but I was struggling. It was hard, This reinvention was hurting a little bit. I had the trekking poles to help me keep my balance, but, they never broke, but they ended up as bowed as my legs by the time I finished. And I'm trudging up the side of this ridge, step at a time, hoping that some bend up here, things going to level out a little bit. And then up ahead of me, I see something coming out of the gloom. It's like a train coming out of a tunnel. And it was a snow machine, sliding slowly down the hill till it come up right by me and it stopped. And I stood there staring at it like a caveman looking at something impossible. It was impossible. The guy turned off the engine and he just stared at me, and finally he said, "I'm Trapper Joe." Trapper Joe, I thought. I knew that name from somewhere. I'd seen it at the lodge, is where it was. I saw his name next to this picture of a guy standing next to a rack of pine marten pelts, like 300 of them, some sort of record. Guy's a local legend. And there he was, sitting on a snow machine on the Lolo Trail. He was wearing these green wool trousers and a red and plaid shirt, looked like a lumberjack, and he had this hat on. It was a wool beanie, but it was so threadbare, it was almost like an old sock. You couldn't keep a biscuit warm with this hat, and he was just sitting in a snowstorm like it was nothing. He said, "You the one that's been messing with my sets?" "Well, no, sir, I don't even know what a set is." Looking me up and down, my orange Gore-Tex and my black ski pants and these way too small snowshoes. "I guess not," he said. "What are you doing out here?" I said, "Well, I'm working my way down the Lewis and Clark Trail. It's kind of a history recreation, you might say." And he laughed a little bit, and the tension broke. And he said, "Well, I got a camp down here a couple of miles, and you might want to think about hanging out with me till this storm blows over. Those snowshoes aren't doing you a lot of good. I got plenty of food, and I like good company." And I thought about it a second, and I realized that, Lewis and Clark stayed with the Mandan Indians during their first winter on the Missouri River. I thought that wouldn't be cheating. I could hang out with Trapper Joe for a couple days. And I did. And it was great. It was great. He had antelope burger and chips, and we had RC colas and root beer. It was a great break in the action. And we talked. He talked all about the area, taught me what that part of the backcountry was like. We talked about the Lewis and Clark Trail. He recommended I did not go up the way I was planning. He said, "That Sherman Saddle, that's a trap up there. Once you get down into the drainage, that's all overgrown. People hadn't been back in there in decades at least." I said, "Well, that's where Lewis and Clark went. That's 200 years ago. A lot happens in 200 years. I know the school's been down there looking for that Hungry Creek, but I don't know how hard they looked." "Well, Joe, I kind of need to go that way. That's the whole point. Just take that snow machine path there all the way down to Kuski. That'd be good enough." "Well, that'd be cheating, Joe, And he knew I meant it. We laughed about it. And he said, "If you get down in there and you see Obiah's cabin, you mark it on that GPS thing you got there. You make a mark of it, because I've heard of it, but I've never seen it." "Obiah's cabin?" "Yeah, that's this little old shack down there. Might have been a trapper shack. The Forest Service hung a sign on it, and it's all beat up. And like I say, I've never seen it, but mark it if you see it." I said, "Okay, I would." And, Joe was right. Everything went to hell at Sherman Saddle. Once I got up and over, the ridge just ran out, and it was thousands of feet to the bottom. I mean, it wasn't a straight drop, but there were parts I couldn't see. And you sure don't go scampering down or sliding down a slope that you can't see. It might get real steep all of a sudden, and it did. I mean, the truth is I didn't have any choice. When I finally got down there, he was right. It was thatch. It was a primeval forest is what it was. These big giant trees had fallen over God knows how long ago, crisscrossed in a lot of places. Giant ones. You could barely crawl over them. And some places maybe under them was even better, but you had to take the pack off. And then all between these trees was these lesser shrubs and the willows, these bendy willows. It was a thatch. There are places that you had to lean into it, put your body weight into it to press, and the willows would slap back and beat on you, and it was demoralizing, man. And if a storm came in, I didn't like to think about that. I just kept moving. The GPS says it was maybe 3 miles to Hungry Creek, and that was the first goal, and I just kept pressing in that direction, and, it took 2 days. It took 2 days of beating my way through that forest to get to a clearing where I could hear Hungry Creek bubbling, and I heard it. Because, creeks in Idaho are like rivers in Texas. They're real big and they're making a lot of noise, and I found it, and I felt refreshed, rejuvenated, and I took my boots off and waded across, got to the other side, and I knew that the trail was just somewhere there south, but it was a slope. I scrambled up the slope on my hands and feet, a couple 100 feet, and there it was. And there it was, man. A trail, Hungry Creek Trail, the Lewis and Clark Trail. And I was elated for about 2 minutes. Because following it led to more of the same, more of the same. You can't believe how many trees were blocking my way. It was like somebody threw a box of chopsticks on the ground. Gigantic chopsticks were blocking my path. And it was getting late in the day. I couldn't continue no matter what. I had to find some place to sleep. The slope was too steep to pitch a tent, so I worked my way back. I retreated a little ways till I found a slope I could get back down towards the creek on, and when I came out of the trees, I saw this old beat-down cabin. I saw Obias' cabin right there in this clearing, not too far from the creek. It was beat up. The shingles were mostly missing, and the sides were worn and gray, and the windows were just holes in the wall. The door was propped up against the side. But man, it looked like the Taj Mahal to me. It was a great feeling. I'd made it. I'm sure the transition wasn't complete, but I had reinvented myself from that businessman to this mountain man. So I made a fire and I ate, and I decided to rest and inventory my food, see if I could make it through those obstacles the way I'd planned, or if I'd have to work my way to the Wilderness Gateway by going south with the creek. And I went to bed that night, and I got up the next morning, and the question answered itself, as you can see. I woke up the next morning, there was 6 inches of new snow. There was no sense in trying to get through all of that deadfall. I couldn't cover 20 miles in 5 days if I could only cover 3 in a pair. But it didn't matter. The goal had been achieved. So I kept those journals. I wrote them all down into a book. I made a book out of it. It's called Lost on Purpose. It was a big hit on Kindle. And I put a link down in the description. So if you're interested in checking it out, then you can find it right down there. More important is go down in the comments and tell me which of the other adventures you'd like me to talk about here. Or maybe, better yet, tell me what kind of adventures you're entertaining. What ideas you got for the next chapter of your life. Maybe your friends think it's crazy, but I might think it's a good idea. So make a comment down there and do the like and subscribe thing, please. We talk about living life on purpose here, and you're not going to want to miss that. So subscribe and make sure that I get to see you next time. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.